of the book by C.S. Lewis called Surprised by Joy. There's a little bit of a play of words there because Joy was the name of the woman that he met late in life and brought a great deal of, I think, happiness and order and contentment to his life in his older years. And then he had to be part of her death from cancer. He wrote another book about that called A Grief Observed. But it's interesting to look at Mary's reaction to being surprised by joy. What would your reaction be if an angel, whom you could identify as Gabriel, the one who is, throughout the Old Testament, the messenger of joy and healing and peace, and Gabriel comes to you and says, "Rejoice! You are highly favored. The Lord is with you." And what does Luke say? She was deeply disturbed. Quite frankly, I don't know fully how to parse that. But I do have one or two reflections on it. Why would Mary be disturbed by those words? Obviously, it would be a surprise. But you would think if you were surprised by joy, that you would not be disturbed. And yet, when something surprising happens to us, even if it is joyful and an announcement of good news, isn't our first reaction to say, "Hey, wait a minute. I don't get this. This isn't what I had planned for. Here is this angel coming in, and I've got to cook dinner in 5 minutes. Or, more deeply, I was planning the life of a certain kind of commitment to God. That was to be my gift to God. And something else is happening. This isn't the way I had planned it." And I think that might hold the key to Mary's reaction, and quite frankly, to our own reaction. This isn't the way I had planned it. And how often is it that our deepest conviction tends to be, "God, do things my way. I do all the right stuff. Why is this happening to me? I am praying that things will get better." We kind of pray, don't we, that God will fulfill our will, and then we will have peace. And that may very well have been something that was tugging at Mary's heart. It was hard for her to receive something, even disturbing to her, to receive receive something that was overwhelmingly different from what she had really thought, had really been preparing herself for. So, she reacts. But her reaction turns immediately into one of openness, turns immediately into a realization as the angel is speaking about her conceiving and bearing a son, and uses all of these Old Testament images. Son of the Most High, the throne of his ancestor David, ruling over the house of Jacob forever. His reign will have no end. All of these, including the name Jesus itself. To anybody who knew the Old Testament like Mary must have, who knew her scriptures, that would resonate that, yes, this is the one who is coming in the power of God, the one who is coming for the peace, the healing, the salvation of his people, of God's people. So, as that was happening, I can imagine Mary getting over her initial disturbance and discovering her heart being opened and filled with those words. But as we discussed the other day, there was one burning question. How can this happen? I have made a commitment. Does God want me to go back on that commitment? And the answer is no. God will overshadow you himself. And that language goes right back to creation. The overshadowing of the Spirit of God hovering over the chaotic waters of the primeval elements, bringing forth all that is. And now God hovering over the emptiness of Mary's virginity, the emptiness, bringing forth the fulfillment of that creation. As I think I reflected a couple of days ago, Mary did not simply say yes. She said, let it be. Because she had already said yes to God's will. Then, if this is what God is doing, not asking her to do, but if this is what God is doing, she will say, let it be. We're here in this Mass praying for peace. All too often, we think that peace is something we can pray for and God will do. Sort of like we're passively standing back, asking God to give us something. I think peace is a little bit like the food out in the wilderness when the feeding of the 5,000. He turns around to us and says, you bring about peace. You be a peacemaker. What do you have that can bring peace? All that I have, Lord, is my heart. Put your heart into my hands. You know what happens when Jesus tells us to put something into his hands? He breaks it. It may well be, because each one of us has this experience, we can become most peacemakers by embracing the brokenness of our hearts. We always want to run away from it. We always deny, ignore, pretend that that brokenness doesn't exist. And God can't work through that. It's only when we embrace our brokenness that God can bring forth wholeness that is the gift to others. I so very often find in counseling people who have suffered traumatically in their lives, or perhaps themselves been guilty of traumatizing others in some way, including through abortion, including taking life in one way or another, including disrupting relationships in a way that, humanly speaking, can't be healed. And one of the things that I often discern, always discern, where God is working in their lives is to bring them through that particular sin. Whether it's sin that has been imposed upon them, or whether it is sin that they themselves have done. To bring them through that, to become a source of healing for others. I always say that's the genius of AA. It's only the person who has recovered or is recovering sobriety who is able truly to be present in a healing way to one who is seeking sobriety. You can replace sobriety with almost any other word that we find elusive and yet are seeking. And so perhaps in this pilgrimage, Mary is leading us to come to terms with some parts of our own lives that we have been running away from. That could be the greatest gift of the pilgrimage. And with her, we should try to embrace those parts of our lives